and we want to welcome everyone. Delighted we got this turnout. We're all excited about tonight, and we're also excited about Saturday when we get to vote on this. This is the Leverett on Native Land, or on Native Land Committee, and we have a warrant on the article, warrant article on the town meeting agenda for Saturday. And we wanted a chance to let people know what we were thinking and what got us to this point. So we're going to tell you the story with the major members of the presenting team tonight, but there are also other members of the On Native Land Committee here tonight. I don't want to miss anybody, but Hanifa, Carol, people are moving around. There was someone else here. Whom I missed? Kathleen and Martin. Right. So Sue, who has been the co-chair of our committee, will lead off with the background to what got us here. I'm going to talk specifically about the warrant article and the challenges we found looking at the whole issue of land acknowledgements. Then Eva is going to talk a little bit about some of the indigenous history of this area. And then Marilyn is going to finish it with talking about what are the actions that we've been planning, people we've been talking to, because we're already moving on that. We've had some action already, and will be the pieces. Okay, so let me turn it over to Sue to start with telling you how we got here. And everybody's going to mute themselves, and we will have plenty of time for discussion. We hope to go maybe 30, 35 minutes and then turn it out, open it up. And we can go longer than 8 if we need to.
This has been quite a journey. A number of our group came together back in March 2021, prompted initially by discussions of celebrating Leverett's 250th. And at the time, we thought our purpose would be to simply propose a land acknowledgement for the town. We initially came up with a draft of a land acknowledgement and proposed a warrant article for the town meeting. But after viewing programs sponsored by the Karuna Center and the 5 College Native American Studies program, we realized that the land acknowledgement had been written without tribal involvement and consultation with Indigenous people, so we withdrew the article. We recognized how much we did not know about our local history, settler colonialism in New England, and the implications of proposing a land acknowledgement. We had much to learn, and we struggled with how to proceed. Through David Brule of the Nolembeka Project, we asked for input from Rich Holshoe of Micmac, Wendat, and European heritage, and Liz Coldwind Santana Kaiser, an elder and councilwoman from the Chabunagungumag band of Nipmuc Indians. Their feedback was a wake-up call. We recognized that we needed to do much more in-depth work, meeting with Native Americans and reading and educating ourselves, which we've done for the last 2 years. We looked at many land acknowledgements from different places and explored the concept of how we and Leverett could include not just a statement, but also a commitment to action. And we wrote many iterations of a new warrant article. In addition, we reached out to the town library to discuss expanding their offerings, and also to the Leverett Elementary School to collaborate in providing resources. We began to explore concrete things that Leverett might offer, including encouraging access to native plants and herbs, exploring planting of sweetgrass, and deeding town land back, among other ideas. We reached out for input and guidance from people with tribal heritage who live in Leverett, including Lisa Brooks of Abenaki and Polish heritage, who is professor of American Studies at Amherst College, and Ray Gold, a member of the Hassanimeco Nipmuc Band of Massachusetts and Executive Director of Native American and Indigenous Studies at Brown University. And we now have a name and a statement of purpose, which was no easy task. On Native land, Leverett Advocacy and Education is a group of residents in the place now called Leverett who are working to become aware of our colonial settler history and its impact on Indigenous people of this area. Our purpose is to raise awareness in ourselves and our community about local and regional Indigenous cultures, histories, and current issues. Educate ourselves and our community about how colonial settlers appropriated land in unjust ways. Connect with and learn from Indigenous educators, activists, storytellers, leaders, and scholars, and share with others. Support, advocate, and collaborate with local and regional Indigenous people and organizations as they inform us about their lives, culture, and history in Quinnipiac, the Connecticut River Valley.
We talked to a lot of people and started to face some of the dilemmas. And I think that was really interesting. And we, as Sue said, we were told right from the beginning, you've got to talk to Indigenous and local Indigenous and regional Indigenous people. Luckily, my daughter had David Brule for French, as many other people's children may have had at the Amherst High School. And so I went up to the Nolan-Becca Festival and said, David, can you connect me and our group to some local Indigenous people who'd be willing to talk to us? And he's the head of the Nolan-Becca Project, which meets regularly, virtually and in person in Turner's. And he invited Jim Perkins and I to go to a meeting. And there he connected us with Rich Holshoe and Liz Coldwind Santana Kiza. And Rich was very generous. We sent him the draft of what we had pulled from town meeting and asked him for his thoughts. And this is what he wrote. And it really profoundly moved me, and I think moved the committee to think quite differently. Thank you for sharing this work of intention on the part of the town of Leverett. And this is an abbreviation of what you wrote. Land acknowledgements are a way of life for earth-based original peoples. They are lived and breathed, as well as explicitly spoken in both ceremony and as a formative constituent of native languages themselves. The languages are based upon this integration of relationship. The land is the people, and the people are the land. There is no difference. Everything that is spoken is a land acknowledgement. By the way, the paradigm of indigeneity is conceived and expressed. When settlers offer a land acknowledgement, it's coming from a very different place and in a different language. Settler colonization is based on the taking of land, and with it, the severing of the indigenous cultures that are based upon the land, and the genocide of the people themselves. The land is seen as an objectified property, and the people are in the way. This was the case centuries ago, and is still the case. The land acknowledgement must confront this, and in some way look for a way forward. In framing these statements, it is important to not repeat the same pattern of behavior of separating, exclusion, elision, accountability, and responsibility, and acknowledgement of future actions. Exactly what this looks like is completely dependent on the setting and the context of the particular parties involved. That really moved us. You know, the land is the people and the people are the land. It's a very different way to think about a land acknowledgement. And he ends with sort of opening it up and said, it's going to be different for each of you. So that was the challenge. And we had many challenges. Everywhere you turn when you try to do this, you face challenges and controversies. So what to call it? A land acknowledgement? Well, we opted for history, culture, and land because it expands it. And we had learned that from talking to Indigenous people. The first thing they said to us, we are still here. Make sure that's clear. what land and what tribes. We counted on Eva and other experts to help us, feel our way through this. And we set on Pecumtuck, Nonotuck, and Nipmuc. And you'll see all of this in the final document that we'll put up in a minute. We had a lot of interesting time trying to pronounce Quinnipiac, and I'm still not going to have it right, but that was also a challenge. They are still here, and that's a very important issue to most Indigenous people. There's a whole issue of firsting and lasting that we had a program on, and that we talk about the settlers being the first people who were here, and the last were the people who, the last natives that left. And what a bizarre concept. We have to acknowledge that they stewarded our beloved land for generations. And the language we use to describe how this change happened is often about violence, slaughter, and removal, but we use the phrase displacement because we don't have any documentation of what happened locally, although in Leverett, although there's a great violence that occurred at the Turners Falls massacre. We wanted to make sure to include gratitude, and that was emphasized. Acknowledgement is not enough. So many land acknowledgements are just perfunctory statements without action. And I'm sure you've all been in meetings where someone reads it in a monotone that's been read 1,000 times, and there's no sense of meaning or texture to it. So we ask, now what? Because it needs to go on. What are the actions we're going to take? Our request is to read this at town meeting every year and to review the actions taken and the actions planned. And Marilyn will say more about this, but it can't just be a statement. It needs to have some action. And Marilyn mentioned some of the actions. The actual warrant article, and now we'll share the screen and put it up, for the Leverett Town Meeting is what I'll now go through and read, and then we'll turn it over. Here we go. Leverett Indigenous History, Culture, and Land Acknowledgement. We acknowledge the town of Leverett is located on or near the ancestral lands of the Pecumtuck, Nonotuck, and Nipmuc people. Leverett is located in the Quinnipiac, Connecticut River Valley, a crossroads of multiple native nations. And as Eva has pointed out, there were both people who were settled in these towns, but this was also a crossroads for people who came, Indigenous people who came through. This is still their homeland. Their voices are in the air we breathe. They are still here. We give thanks and acknowledge that we are standing on land that Indigenous peoples stewarded for generations. The colonization of this area led to the displacement of these native peoples. We need to learn and relearn to listen to native voices as they teach us, guide us, and remind us how to live in balance and reciprocity. This is the critical part of building relationships. We've been taught by Indigenous elders that we should be grateful and thankful for all that we've been given, the land, the waters, and all creations. We've been given all these things. We do not need to ask for anything. What will we do with what we've been given? Acknowledgement is not enough. It's a first step in community and self-education. This is just the beginning. This is now. What will we do now? And this statement was adapted with much appreciation from the work of David Brule, the president of the Board of Trustees of the Nolan Becker Project. And almost all the language is his. We made some small changes. So the resolution to town meeting to see if the town will vote to adopt the following resolution or take any action thereto. We propose that at the start of every Leverett Town Meeting, this Leverett Indigenous History, Culture, and Land Acknowledgement be read. The reading will be followed by a description of the actions taken and programs presented in the past year, as well as proposals for the coming year. What will we do now? So that's what will happen at town meeting. And now I'll turn it over to Eva, who will give us some history.
For thousands of generations, for over 12,000 years, Indigenous people were here. We don't know all the names that were associated with the different tribes over the 12,000 years. What we know are from the last 400 years. During this time, the part that was Leverett, here in red, was part of the homelands of the Pecumtuck people, who had occupations on both sides of the Connecticut River. So this is a map of our area. I will explain it. Much has been said about Indigenous people having their land taken by colonists outright. And there's certainly history of that practice in the United States. In Leverett, there was a deed, but the story is a little more nuanced than just a deed. So a little backtracking history. Before colonization in this area, we all know there was the beaver trade. And when colonization came in, the demand in Europe for beaver pelts increased. That put a lot of stresses on both colonists and Native people. Native people benefited from the trade of beaver pelts in exchange for various goods, including cloth, kettles, guns. At the same time, the changing ecology from over-trapping resulted in a growing scarcity of pelts, which had in turn an impact. Native men, often with the encouragement of white traders, began purchasing goods on credit, which sometimes led to Native people facing debts that they had no way to repay. This was the case with the Pecumtuck leader, the Sunk Squaw Mashalisk. She was the one who sold the land that became Sunderland and Leverett and part of Montague to free her son, who was imprisoned in Springfield. Having no other means to repay her son's debt, her deed was in exchange, quote, in consideration of a debt and dues from her son, I'm gonna probably mess up his name, Wadawolunks, to John Pynchon of Springfield, for and in consideration of one large Indian coat and several small things. She sold the land that from what we now call the Mohawk Brook, which is the boundary line between Sunderland and Hadley, up to where the Sawmill River comes out, and 6 miles to the east. Mount Toby's here, Leverett is here. So she sold the land that became Leverett for one large Indian coat and several small things, and to free her son from jail. Okay, so this was the map. There was a Leverett which separated in 1774. Before King Philip's War, or after King Philip's War, I was talking about how folks, the Agawam, Pecumtuck, Nawatuk, and Waranoco people, as well as others who were displaced, the governor of New York set up Schaghticoke, which is important in the history because some of the names of tribes became Schaghticoke because that's where they moved to. So some moved here, some moved to Schaghticoke, some moved to other Native communities, but they held their connection to the land. In time, actually, there are records in Deerfield where even after the many wars, Native people returned in 1691 and were welcomed by the local people, the settlers. In 1694, however, the General Court of Massachusetts confined quote unquote friendly Indians to small areas and later offered bounties for scalps, every Indian, great or small. At various times over the next 80 years, Native people were dispersed to Canada and New York, as well as other parts of New England. We actually have in our Leverett history, a Connecticut resident who moved to Brushy Mountain, who was paid during the Revolution to remove Native people. It is not in the records that I found that say where they moved them to. The myth that Native people just left is a myth. Some Native people lived in praying villages. Some had a more migratory life. In 1861, nearly 200 years after King Philip's War, Massachusetts recognized that Native people were still here when they commissioned John Milton Earl to examine the conditions of the quote unquote Indians who lived in the Commonwealth. And in 1865, for the first time, the Massachusetts census added Indian to the color category. And this on the top here is Mary Pike, who is identified as an Indian. This is something that Forrest Briggs told us many years ago, and this is the documentation. There are two stories that I know of locally where Native people were passing through, one in Montague and one in Leverett, and Mary Palmer was one of those who fell in love with Aaron Pike on Brushy Mountain. And this is a photograph of their son, Simon Pike, who reportedly was still living on Brushy in 1874. There's a whole story that's kind of fun about them helping capture two men who robbed a man in Vermont. It's a fun story. While there are occupation sites on the most of them are on the west side of the Connecticut River. There are both documented and suspected archaeological sites in Leverett, and that information is held confidentially by the Massachusetts Historical Commission for good reason. These are photographs of sites in Western Massachusetts where Native tribal historic preservation officers have identified them as ceremonial. And so that's like a very, very brief version of what we know about Native people in Leverett. And now I'm going to pass it on to Maryland.
Great, thank you so much, Eve. I love hearing all this historical perspective and what's happened here in the past, and it just, you know, it's just what we're really looking to do with this land acknowledgement and really acknowledge the people that have been here and those people that are here now. And as Tom had said before, this is now, what will we do now? And I'll just give a brief synopsis of some of the actions that we have taken so far. Some of you may have been on the call on September 14th when Dr. Jean O'Brien, who's a professor of history at the University of Minnesota, gave a presentation, as Tom alluded to. The topic was on firsting and lasting, writing Indians out of existence in New England. And this presentation was given in collaboration with Historic Northampton. We also collaborated with the director of Leverett Library to purchase children's books about Indigenous people, past and present. And Hannah has been very enthusiastic about getting books, adult and children's books on Native Americans. Let's see, people have explored trails located in Leverett with Lisa Brooks, who was mentioned earlier, a local Indigenous scholar. We created a relationship with the Leverett Elementary School, meeting with the principal and third grade teacher there to support a project or presentation of Indigenous people in the Kinnetekwa, Connecticut River Valley. And this aligns with the third grade history curriculum. We created an agreement with Common Ground to be our fiscal sponsor so we can support different initiatives in Leverett to further education and advocate for Indigenous people. And lastly, we've cultivated ideas for the 250th anniversary that emphasize the presence of Native Americans here in Leverett and in the Kinnetekwa River Valley. And, you know, planning ahead, we would like to create a subcommittee regarding legislation in Massachusetts that impacts Native Americans. There's a lot of different things that are going on at this level, and we really want to be aware of them and be able to participate. Providing a grant for Leverett Elementary School for a project or presentation this year. Commemorative signage indicating places in Leverett with Indigenous names. And I think on some of the slides, you may have seen some of Indigenous names that were here in, I can't pronounce it, Eva, but the Sawmill River and other places. Implement the 250th anniversary activities. We're working on that, such as a brochure, trail walks, book reads, and ecumenical service. And really bring awareness to people about local Indigenous organizations that are in the area that are doing things in this valley. Also museum exhibits, lectures and discussions, and perhaps put this on Leverett Connect so people know what is happening around here and to get involved. And as Tom said, you know, at town meeting, read Land Acknowledgement and actions that have been taken in the past year and what we propose for the next year. So that's hopefully that we will, our actions and possibly more. I think now we would love to have any questions, and I'm just going to go around. If you put your hand up or put the little yellow hand, that's part of the participants, I think, down there. People have been on Zoom. And if you have a question, I will call on you and you can unmute. Tom. You have to unmute, Tom.
Let me first note that we cited the Nolan Becker project, and David Brule has joined our call. So we're
Fabulous
and honored.
Thank you, David. Anybody have any questions?
Comments?
Thank you, Judy, for what you put in the chat. Yes, Sue, you can unmute.
The only comment I would like to make is I would like to say yes, please, as far as putting notifications or information on Leverett Connects. I would love to stay in tune with what's going on.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions about the warrant?
Donna.
Oh,
yeah.
good.
I don't have a question. I just have an appreciation for hearing the journey. You know, reading, Tom, as you alluded to, reading the end result, reading a statement has had meaning for me, but it's got so much more depth and context now. And so thank you. And thank you for all your work, everyone.
Yeah, I want to second that. I really appreciate the efforts you put in and what you're doing now and what we might be able to do going forward.
Thank you.
And Don, that's an invitation for people to brainstorm with us what we might do going forward.
Yes.
I'd like to chime in and express gratitude for this initiative and all the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Deborah.
I'd love to stay informed.
And just to say too is that there's, you know, a handful or so of us on this in this group, and if anyone would like to join our group, please let us know. We'd love to have as many people as possible be part of this.
You can put your comment if you want to join in the chat. We take enrollment in any form.
Yeah,
Yes.
I have a few things I want to add. One, or just say, one is just thank you first and foremost for taking a step back and doing the research that led you all here. Really appreciated hearing the history, and I feel excited about the warrant. I do wonder, would love to hear your thoughts on what your conversations have been so far about like how the warrant has been received outside of the folks here. Have you been hearing also like other forms of support? The other question that the question that I have also is to go back about the Indigenous woman that deeded the land in order to get her son from Springfield. I'm wondering if there's any thoughts, and this could be premature, but just curious about kind of restitution around that, and I know that's very complicated, but I'm just, that was something we were thinking about, is just what the conversations around local restitution have been. I know it's early, so I don't expect a lot, but just wanted to put that out there.
There's some wonderful examples of reparations and restitution going on in Western Massachusetts. I can't remember the name of the farm in Belchertown is now being actively considered in terms of being turned over to Native Americans. There's a group in Petersham that's working on doing that kind of a thing as well. We've gotten as far as saying opening the land to native harvesting, but there's much more we could do. And I think that's an interesting question. I don't know what other people's thoughts might be on that.
No, I think that's true. And I think it's Lamson Farm. I think that might be
That's
the
right,
name
that's
of it. Right. Yes. Yes.
Stephen and Brian have hands up.
Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, I also want to appreciate all the work you've been doing, and this has been a very interesting 45 minutes for me, listening to your summation of your progress so far. I'm just curious, what other sorts of actions or just general motions have you thought about doing going forward? I mean, you talked about restitution. That sounds very interesting, but have you thought about any other things?
We've had a lot of
think,
about
yeah,
education, Carolyn, you're the expert on that. Right.
what's that, Tom?
I said, you're the expert on education. We've had a lot of talk about community education programs.
Right. How about involving some Native Americans in that process? Is that, do you think that's an option?
Well, we hope that everything we do will be done in partnership with Indigenous people. And in fact, that's part of our commitment to our fiscal agent is that any funds we receive, half, I believe, is going to be given to Native Americans for participation in whatever endeavors we undertake. We're also talking about, Stephen, we're also talking about naming. And there are a couple of proposals for, Eva could say something more about this, I think, of recovering names, that Native American names for locations in Leverett that we are sure of, and with appropriate signage.
Yeah, there are two names that we found in deeds that we are that we're working on trying to get signs up relative to those. I think, but the bigger question that you're asking, Stephen, we just haven't gotten that far yet. And we're committed to working with tribal people, and that's not always an easy thing. There are no federally recognized tribes locally, nor are there Massachusetts recognized tribes locally. So that just, it makes it all harder, and we're taking it one step at a time and are very open to other possibilities and ideas.
Great.
And we have had connections with Okito, which is an education center in Ashfield. And certainly we've talked to Rich about potentially doing some education and others. Okito is Renee Anderson and Larry Spotted Crowman. We do a lot of education around here. And the Karuna Center has done some wonderful programs, although they're not in a Native American group, but we're accumulating some resources that we would think about using.
So you've been doing a lot of thinking. It sounds great. If I can help in some way, I'll be really happy to do that.
Great.
No, thank you.
Leave us your name in the chat. Tom has had his hand up for a while.
And I think Brian was first, I believe. Tom?
Yeah. There's Brian.
Yeah, not unmuted. We just wanted to say thank you and how much we appreciate the work that you all have put into this. 45-minute presentation is hours and hours and hours of work. We realize it. Thank you very much.
And thank you for extending it to the school as a good anchor, I think, for carrying the work on and having the children then grow up and understand more about their place of, they're living in this place.
Marilyn's been our main contact with the school, and then Marilyn reported to us, and I was down on one meeting. They were enormously welcoming. They just said, "Oh, we're already doing some things. Can you add to it? What ideas do you have? What resources do you have?" So it was quite amazing. And the third grade teacher has been involved, and when Lisa Brooks' kid went through there, they got very involved. So it's interesting.
Right. I think Jonathan Perry, I believe it is, Lisa Brooks's husband did a presentation to third grade class last year, and I'm not too sure if he's able to do it this year. But the third grade teacher and I are going to be in communication as to what kind of project or presentation that they could do this year, if possible. And the principal is fabulous. She was just very, very positive about having a collaboration with us. Who else had their hand up, Tom?
Tom Ewing. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry.
My husband, wait a minute.
Yes, your husband.
Sorry, I was really intrigued by what Tom, you were saying at the beginning about the land is the people and the people are the land, and I'm just thinking about how this whole project might change my relationship with Leverett. That kind of concept. It's something it's new and it's quite a powerful idea. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that.
You summarized my experience. I was blown away by it. And it's a lot like Buddhist thinking. It's a lot like, all kinds of concepts of oneness, but it's really deeply integrated into the way they think and function. And it presents an enormous challenge. And, when Mashalik sold the land, I don't think she had much of an understanding of what selling land meant, because land was always shared. Land was what you moved through. It was your relationship to it. So and that's why I was so moved by Rich Holshue's letter to us, which, we just sent him this piece of paper and he writes us this profound piece about how he sees it so differently. And it takes a lot to wrap our head around it. And maybe there are people who can help us as we do education programs with that issue, because I think that's a critical one, Tom. And I appreciate you calling attention to it, because I read that and I said, the land is the people of land. And I went, whoa. And then they go on to describe how the settlers saw it totally differently. Oh yeah, it's something we exchange. It's what we buy. I don't know what other people's thoughts are on this. It really, as it's doing to you, Tom, blew me away.
Annie Proulx, if any of you have read any of her novels, she wrote a historic novel called Barkskins. And I was really interested in reading that. It's about how Native Americans were really forced to participate in the logging of Canada and Maine and totally decimating that land. And I don't know if Eva, if you have any information about that part of their history, but as a small portion of my ancestry is Micmac from Shippagan Island in New Brunswick. I was very interested in reading that book. I at first had the notion that I learned from my Meme and Pepe, my Canadian ancestors, and Basque, they were Basque as well, that Basques came and married Native women, and some French did, although some were the filles de roi, which are daughters of the king. I was not part of that, being Basque, so they married Native Americans. Anyway, that really spurred me to read more about the logging industry, and it was just systematically all the way through from the East Coast and Maine all the way to Wisconsin, decimating forests for centuries. And we probably did that as well in Leverett because we have a lot of little rivers leading into a big river. And they did use little rivers and they little dams and really flood out areas that led into large streams. So, I was really interested in hearing that, and maybe that happened here as well in Leverett. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Nancy.
Tim Shore has
Eva,
his.
yeah, Tim.
Thanks, everybody.
Tim?
You're muted, or
He disappeared.
Yeah, I got dropped off. Okay, I'm back.
Okay.
As I watched this, it occurred to me that the group here has, the way you've presented it, the way you presented your process of learning and finding history and working with partners like Nolambika, it seems like there's been a lot of care and attention to overcoming the challenges of history as it typically is practiced, and trying to, study history of, indigenous backgrounds of these lands in a way that is responsible and responsive. And I wonder a couple things. One is I wonder if you've encountered other towns or groups throughout the region who are trying to work out the same problem, finding a better, more responsible approach to local history and indigenous issues. And I also kind of wonder, so history as we normally practice it in small towns is often has a lot of emphasis on colonial and settler past. And so there's kind of these two streams of history taking place in a town like Leverett. How do the streams converge? Do they collide into each other? Or is there going to be more of a weaving operation?
That brings us to one of our more amusing discussions that we've had over the last couple of years of the, if you've driven up 5 and 10 by the fire station, you saw the 2-story high cake. Anybody seen that? They use that for all the town anniversaries. And we were trying to imagine how, and that'll be sitting on the lawn next to the school. We're trying to imagine how do we integrate that, as you're saying, Tim. So there's some interesting challenges, but I think we'll find a wonderful, productive, and integrated way to do that. But it's been a challenge, and we've had, two historians at least, and Eva, who's an amazing expert on the committee. We had a wonderful, wonderful walk with Lisa Brooks up Rattlesnake Gutter Road. And as she talked about her fascination with coyotes. And so we've had some very interesting ways of trying to understand that. And there have been some, we've been exposed to all kinds of other towns around here, Conway and others, where we've read some histories of how they've integrated their history and their indigenous history into the traditional settler history. But there's no answer. And we got to say, I'll put my thanks out again to David Brule, because when I saw the language, and really we stole 90% of it from, with permission, from his statement, it really caught the nuances of what we were concerned about. And I'm sure it still can be cleaned up, but we were pleased to find something like that.
And I just have to say what you were saying, Tim, that, it could be right now there's two strands, especially when looking at the 250th, which is wonderful. And that's how we really started, to get ideas and pull together to say, what can we do as this group to show and educate and advocate for the people that were here and the people that are, are here now. And so that's why we're brainstorming ideas for the 250th as well. Whether we will be doing something throughout the whole year and not just, the weekend of the celebration. So any ideas are totally welcome. And maybe in the future, they will weave together little by little.
But the concept of 250 is just weird when you've started to look at,
Exactly.
10,000 years of indigenous history. There's this little plunk. And so someone had a wonderful idea of doing a timeline.
Yeah,
just
that was me.
250 is compared to
I want to
10,000.
do it with the kids, starting at the elementary school and going down to the library, and just to show how many years that indigenous people were here. So maybe we'll do that. We'll see.
Martin has
Or
his
has a
hand up.
Martin,
Come
you're
in.
muted. Yeah.
I was going to say that combining the two histories, you hear two strands and you think, oh, they are nicely interweavable. It's just not so. History has been used to make Native Americans invisible, and the revisibilization of indigenous people is significantly more difficult, as is the weaving together of two histories that were kind of in counterposition to each other. One was used to eradicate the other. David Brule can talk about surrounding towns that have gotten significantly further in that kind of a process. And I warmly advise you to keep track of whatever Olumbeka is doing, because they are quite successful in that direction. And we keep up with what they are doing and trying to get to the same place that they have gotten to.
Thank you, Martin.
Linda Hoare has her hand up.
Linda, unmute yourself.
Okay. This has brought up a lot of thoughts for me. Sorry, I've got a cold, but that the land is the people and the people are the land. Well, that's us now, whoever's here. And how do we partner with the concept of how Native peoples, indigenous peoples honored the land and not used it, but not through ownership use? How do we, I think that's where we weave things together. We're the people and the land now. How do we use, in a good way, the best of indigenous people's care of the land so we can just move forward in a healthy society. I think that's a really important thing to look at. How do we benefit from the work that you are doing to make Leverett not just a place that we love, but that we're part of everything?
Those are really good questions, Linda, and I think that's what we've been focusing on and will continue to focus on. Not easy answers.
But if those could be the questions that we bring to the town for the next couple of years, then I think we honor the request, because we'll be chewing on that together. So we need all of you to figure out how to do that and to join us. Don?
Yeah. Don, go ahead.
Yeah, I gotta unmute.
You're on.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's been any thought about connecting with the Leverett Trails Committee or the Kestrel Land Trust to think about how they might help with like the 250 celebration, or renaming some of the trails, or dedicating some of the public lands to this effort. I'm not sure what that would look like, or even hard to think about, but they may have some thoughts for us.
So the Leverett Trails Committee is co-sponsored by the Rattlesnake Gutter Trust and by the Conservation Commission. And at this point, kind of after COVID, we're pulling ourselves back together and trying to get the trails back together. But there is definitely talk about some educational kinds of hikes. Naming is hard because there aren't a lot of names in the histories that are within Leverett. Many of the towns around here, including Sunderland and Montague, in the 1800s wrote these really thick histories that I mean, they're not necessarily tribally focused in any way, but there was typically a lot of tribal information in there about the towns. Sunderland, we were part of Sunderland, but they didn't give us a lot of space in their history, and Leverett didn't write its own. And so a lot of that information has either been lost or is hiding. And at this point, there are really only 2 tribal names for places in Leverett that I've come across in my work. Doesn't mean that's all there is, but that's what I've come across at this point. And I have trouble pronouncing both of them. I'm working on it. I could spell them, but it is something that people on the Trails Committee and Rattlesnake Gutter Trust and some of the Con folks are certainly interested in.
We're coming to the end of the promised hour. Any final questions or comments? Well, we really appreciate that you all turned out.
Judy,
Don.
I think Judy has a question. Oh,
Just a
you're
real
muted.
quick.
That's a clap.
Oh, that was a clap. Thank you, Judy.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Don has this.
Don, go ahead.
Just a real quick question. What time do you are you going to propose this your proposition at the town meeting?
There's only one warrant. It's always the end of the meeting. I always call it the foreign policy part of the Leverett Town Meeting. This is now internal. And when I spoke to Margie, she said the agenda looks pretty short and it might be over close to lunch. But then you all have to stay for lunch with the co-op. But I think it'll be towards the end of the morning. And there won't be anything after it, at least what Margie told me.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
we will, Sue will read the comment and I will make some brief comments about the process. And then you're all welcome to make comments and say, this is the best warrant we've ever seen. Sue, anything else?
No, I would just, I would just add to Tom's encouragement that you come to town meeting and vote for this, but also talk to your friends and neighbors and encourage them to do so too. Tom has mentioned this. I don't know that we mentioned this tonight, but he did post it on Leverett Connects. We've recorded this session. And so if there's anyone who's interested in seeing it, Tom will be posting on Leverett Connects or Eva, anyway, I'll link to the recording. So anyone who would like to look at it before the town meeting, that would be great.
We got a lot of requests for people who couldn't be here. And there were at least 2 or 3 other town meetings, Energy and some others. Great. Well, thank you all. Talk to your friends and neighbors.
Thumbs up.
Yes, thank you all for being here and for taking this hour to be with us and to hear what we're doing and what we plan for the future. Thank you so much.